Hi, everyone. I'm Joan Raymond, and this is A Heart for Writing. And this is where I offer encouragement, support, and resources to writers of all genres. Today, I'm chatting with Dennis Palumbo. And let me bring up a picture. Dennis is he's a formerly a Hollywood screenwriter. He did My Favorite Year, Welcome Back, Kotter. He's also a licensed psychotherapist whose work with creative people has been featured on CNN, NPR, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and elsewhere. He's an award-winning mystery thriller author. And, let's just bring Dennis on because there's just a lot of good stuff we want to talk about today. There you go. Hi, Dennis.
Hey, Joan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I'm excited. There's just so many things to talk about here. So, between screenwriting, between your past with screenwriting, your psychotherapy practice, your current series, we got a lot to talk about. So,
Mm.
I want to go back to the beginning. I want to go back to, and I always ask all my guests the same question: when did you discover you had a heart for writing?
In high school, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I just started writing short stories. And then when I was in college, I ended up majoring in English at Pitt, University of Pittsburgh, in their writing department.
Okay.
And so I got the opportunity to work on, you know, my first horrible, unfinished, unpublished novel, a
Uh-huh.
bunch of short stories. And it's a great program at Pitt, and I had wonderful instructors. They were all
Mhm.
working writers themselves, and so I was very lucky.
That's awesome. What genre were you writing back then?
You know, it's funny, mostly kind of crime-ish suspense stuff, because I have always loved my favorite film genre is film noir.
Okay.
And I've been reading mysteries. When I was 10 or 11, I had the mumps, and my dad bought me this beautiful illustrated Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and I was hooked.
Uh-huh.
I just thought mysteries were great. I thought Sherlock Holmes was great, and I've been reading mysteries ever since. And even when I was working on television sitcoms, when I was like on Welcome Back, Kotter, and I wrote the first Love Boat episode,
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
really?
Well, even when I was doing that, I was selling short stories to
Uh-huh.
Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. I've always loved the genre.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, And so let's talk about screenwriting. I didn't know you'd done the first Love Boat because, I grew up in the era of the Love Boat, Welcome Back, Cotter, all those wonderful things. So talk about that. How did you get into that? And
Well, it's very long and complicated, so I'll just give you the 1 minute version. I was
okay.
writing with another writer, a very funny guy named Mark Evanier, and we just decided to try to break into show business. And so, we wrote a couple spec scripts. We wrote an episode of MASH, I think, and then through a long, convoluted process, we managed to get it to a producer who said, "Well, this is not my cup of tea, but I know an agent that I should send you guys to."
Mhm.
And the agent at that time, the Love Boat pilot had just aired, but they were looking for people to write stories for the series.
Right.
And they did something that I don't even know the Writers Guild would let you do anymore. They just had a bunch of writers in a room. They showed us the pilot and they said, "Go away and come back with ideas," because they were going to do three stories
Right.
per hour episode.
Hmm.
And we came in and we pitched 4 or 5 stories. They picked one, and so we were the one of the 3 stories in the first episode of the series,
Wow.
and that's how Mark and I started.
Wow. And then Welcome Back, Cotter, and My Favorite Year. I mean, you just had a lot of
Yeah,
things that,
I was very lucky. Canine, Whitewater Summer. I worked on 4 or 5 sitcoms
okay.
and about 4 or 5 movies. And but the whole time I was doing it, I was writing mystery short stories
Mm, that was
and
still your thing.
writing, columns for the LA Times. I've always loved writing prose. In
Uh-huh.
fact, when I was an English major at Pitt, I didn't think about film and TV. I thought I was going to be a novelist. So I kind of backed into film and television.
Right. Now, did you write under your actual name for the
Oh,
screenwriting? Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay. Now the psychotherapy, you work with creative people. You work with
Mhm.
people that are writers and whatnot. And you started your practice in 19, when was that?
Let me see.
No,
God,
I saw 99
yeah,
somewhere.
I
Is that?
think 99 is about. It's been about almost 30 years
Oh, wow.
that I've been
Okay.
in private practice. I had been a show business film and TV writer for about 17 years.
Hmm.
Um, and in California, to get licensed as a clinician, it takes a long time.
Right.
It took me about 6 years between the graduate work and the internship. You have to do 3,000 clinical hours as an intern before you can even sit for the exam. So the whole time I was in school, which I did at nights and on the weekends, I was still working in film and TV.
So you were, um, so you knew you wanted to be a psychotherapist at this time, even though
No, it's
no, okay.
interesting.
That's why,
I was,
that's, yeah.
yeah, I was in therapy as a patient, and
Okay.
that I found the process fascinating. So I started taking some graduate courses, not thinking I wanted to change my career necessarily, but I thought, well, as a writer, it couldn't hurt to take all these courses in psychology.
Right.
And then I started volunteering at a low fee clinic. And the next thing I knew, one of the professors at the school I was going to said, look, I work at a private psychiatric hospital. You want to co lead a group of schizophrenics with me
Wow.
doing psychodrama? I said, all right, I'll try it. And, I had, after a number of years, I started noticing that I was actually accruing hours
Oh, wow.
that, and over again, I'm giving you the 2-minute version,
Sure, sure.
but over a long period, I began noticing how much I loved working with patients.
Hmm.
And so, and the movie business was changing. This
Right.
was the time of Jaws and Star Wars and stuff. I love those movies, but I came to town to write Chinatown and Big Little Man and The Conversation and The Godfather, grown up movies.
Right.
And Hollywood has shifted and it has continued to do so,
Hmm.
certainly now with the comic book movies. So that it wasn't, you couldn't make My Favorite Year now.
Right.
You couldn't make Chinatown now. You couldn't make The Usual Suspects now. And so it was a combination of wanting to do something else that was related to psychology, and also the sense that the what people were looking for from writers didn't interest me as much.
Hmm.
And so I've been very, very lucky. My practice took off, I think, primarily because I wrote a column for the Writers Guild magazine, and it was in there every month. And members of the Writers Guild read it, and I got most of my referrals from that column.
Right. And you did, so you're seeing creative people. Well, obviously you're still, talking with creative people. Um, why do you feel creative people need, well, not the most help, but what excites you about helping creative people?
Well, the first thing I think of all the time is I wish someone like me had existed when I was starting out, because the issues that my patients deal with, anxiety, depression, writer's block, any kind of creative block, procrastination, fear of failure,
Hmm.
all of these issues everyone deals with. You don't have to be a lawyer can deal with it, a
Right.
doctor can deal with it. But because of my experience, I thought, well, I should specialize in working with creative people because I'm uniquely qualified to do so. I mean, if a person comes in and says, look, I have performance anxiety when I have to pitch to NBC, I have to go pitch them a show.
Hmm.
And I think to myself, I've pitched 1,000 times. I know exactly what they're talking about.
Right.
And one of the things that I've seen over the years is my patients can speak to me in showbiz shorthand. They can come in and go, God, I'm having such trouble with my second act. I know exactly what they're talking about.
Right.
Or,
Right.
I don't know how to make my B story work.
Right.
Or, and I've had a
I'm
number of
stuck in
patients.
the ugly middle. Yes.
Yeah, I'm stuck in the ugly middle. And I've had a number of patients over the years who, they come to me and they go, well, I was with another therapist, but when I talked about my anxiety about writing or my fear of rejection, they'd say, well, pick something else to do. And see, that just shows me how unattuned that therapist was.
Right.
Creative people, it's not really a choice. As one of my patients said, it's a curse you've been blessed with,
Yeah.
or a blessing you've been cursed with. Whichever it is, you rarely think, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try to get into an impossible field where the competition is brutal, where you mostly face rejection, and you have to coexist with your self-doubt every day as you work.
I
That's
love that.
tough
That's
for me.
great.
So it does, now the reality is, regardless of what a person enters therapy for, even if it's for a creative issue, like I mentioned,
Mhm.
procrastination or writer's block or whatever, these issues are all inextricably bound with that person's personal issues. They're connected,
Mhm.
you know. So if you had a critical parent, it doesn't surprise me that you don't like everything you write.
Right.
So the work ends up being sort of regular therapy. We
Right.
kind of do a little triage over what they're coming in for. And then it just kind of smooths out into marriages and their kids and substance use and all that stuff. The
Mhm.
usual garden variety therapy stuff.
Right. So a person coming to you with imposter syndrome, because I talk to people about imposter syndrome too. But so, what are some of the ways that you help people get through imposter syndrome?
Well, as I like to say, there is no one size fits all a way to address any issue. So I'd have to know a little bit more about the person, but generally speaking, and this is a huge generality because we're doing an interview,
Right.
imposter syndrome has its source in your childhood dynamics. And if you come from a family that you were heavily criticized, or you come from a family where you were made to feel not as competent, special, or talented as one of your parents or one of your siblings, or if you came from a background where there were certain expectations on how you were supposed to perform out into the world. The downside about that is that even if you do perform well initially, which most people don't, but if you do, you're always going to wonder, am I going to be found out?
Right.
Was this just a lucky break? What's going to be revealed about me the next time I put out my next product, whether it's a painting or a piece of music, or I make a short film and it wins something at Sundance, and now a studio has hired me to direct an actual feature, and all of my flaws are going to be revealed.
Right.
The thing about imposter syndrome that's so difficult is usually you're measuring yourself against your idols. One of my patients won an Oscar for best screenplay, and I said, congratulations, when he came in the next time. And he said, yeah, but I'm no Billy Wilder.
Wow.
And so most people who are self-reflective and sensitive, while they want the gratification of success, are usually somewhat reluctant to take too much ownership of it. Their fear is the rug will be pulled out from under them, that they'll
Hmm.
be less than their idols. Which is why I always like something Ernest Hemingway said. He was speaking to other writers, and he said, "Boys," because they were all males, of course.
Right.
He said,
Right.
"Boys, Shakespeare got there first and better, so relax." And I actually remember that sometimes when I'm writing one of my mystery novels. I always
Uh-huh.
think something like Raymond Chandler got there first and better, so just relax.
Right. Pressure's off. You don't have to do
Pressure's
it.
off.
Yeah.
That job of great mystery writer has already been fulfilled.
Yeah. That's awesome. Now, I remember the last time we talked, which was, oh my goodness, it was March of 2020, and then July of 2020 during the pandemic lockdown. And you did a conference for us. And the big thing back then is nobody could write. we all had what, I don't want to even say it was writer's block. It was just we couldn't write because life was so different.
Hmm.
And you had a lot of good advice back then. And do you, for people that,
I hope I can remember any of it.
I'll just make it up, anyway. But I was going to say for people that are blocked a little bit, or, they feel like same thing. And I mean, I'm sure imposter syndrome comes into it. For a person that's blocked, I remember you told me just do it. Just put pen to paper. It doesn't make a difference what comes out. Just get back on the horse type thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, writers solve their problem by writing, not by thinking.
Hmm.
And I also think it's a mistake to worry about being inspired or even feeling like it. I do believe that action precedes motivation. I mean, I do my exercise bike here in the office, and I have never wanted to get on my exercise bike. And then I get on it, and after 10 minutes, I'm glad I'm on it. I've never wanted to write any of the 6 mystery thrillers I've written,
Really?
but my writing self doesn't care about my feelings. We don't have that kind of relationship. I'm a blue collar guy.
Yeah.
And if I tell myself, hey, it's time to write another mystery novel, I start typing. Chapter 1, go.
Hmm.
And in my experience, 10 minutes into it, I'm very inspired.
Right.
So I believe that action precedes motivation. Now, I also think it's important when you're blocked to pay attention to the meaning you give the block. Writing's hard, so you're going to get blocked all the time. Telling a story is a good one is difficult. But I think what's actually causes more pain and more anguish is the meaning you give it. Let's say that you're blocked and you go, wow, maybe that means the story's not any good, or maybe it means I'm not really a good writer, or I bet Michael Connolly never gets blocked. Maybe my parents were right and I should have gone to law school. The meaning the block gives you is actually the biggest source of the anguish. So if you can say to yourself, well, let me look at what I'm writing. Let's say I've always written short stories, I'm trying to write a novel. Or let's say I've always written nonfiction, I'm trying to write fiction. Or let's say I've never written a sex scene before. Or I've never written anything based on something that actually happened in my family. There's a number of things that could be contributing to the anxiety that's causing the block.
Right.
And so I also think, and everybody always looks at me like I'm crazy, I think writer's block is good news for writers because it usually means you're about to take an important developmental step in your writing. It's like a toddler learning to walk. They get up, they fall down, they hold on to the chair, then they fall down. Sooner or later, they master the developmental step of walking, and then it's no big deal.
Right.
I think every writer has to go through a number of developmental steps. If you look at the biography of painters, writers, musicians, almost every one of them has like a blue period or a period where their work gets repetitive or where they stop working, and then they start up again.
Right.
And I think the reason I think it's an appropriate developmental step is I've never met someone who, having worked through a block, didn't think they were a better writer on the other side.
Interesting. I love
So,
the way you reframe it.
and so I think if you frame it that way, you remove some of the shame and look at it a little more analytically as, wow, for me to grow as a writer, I'm going to have to struggle. And the struggling itself says nothing about you as a writer. Writing's hard.
I like that. So are you a pantser or are you a outliner when you
Oh,
write?
total pantser.
Okay. I am too.
Which I got to tell you, I don't recommend it to people because for me, there's a lot of rewriting in the
Yeah.
sense that I just write a sentence and start. And I don't even know who the victim is for like 100 pages. And I never know who the killer is till about page 300.
Well, I'm the same way. I'm the
I,
same way. I write to find out who the killer is in my
that's
books.
exactly what I do because my characters, I don't know who they are till they start talking.
Uh-huh.
And then they tell me who they are. So I just take dictation from about
Yeah.
that point on.
A lot of people don't understand. They're like, okay, you guys are crazy. It's like, no, we really, that's just the way we write.
Well,
We listen to our
yeah, the thing
characters
is,
and, yeah,
but there's a lot of rewriting involved,
right.
which I'm fine with because I'd rather write than think. I don't like thinking when it comes to writing. I'd rather write than think. If I go down a tangent, for 10 pages that is not working, I don't mind because usually there'll be a line of dialogue or there'll be a descriptive passage
Hmm.
in those 10 pages that will work in the book
Yeah.
that I discover and go, well, I can't actually have him go down to the barn. That doesn't help the story. But boy, I love that description of the sunset. So I'm going
Right.
to keep that.
Yep. That's awesome. So let's talk about your writing. The book that you just came out. Well, the actual series. It's a mystery thriller, and your main character is a psychologist and trauma expert. So, working with the Pittsburgh Police. So write what you know, right, Dennis?
Yeah, well, the thing is, my lead character is Italian American, comes from a blue collar background, grew up in
Right,
Pittsburgh, where my books are sent, went to Pitt, where I went.
right.
And he's a consultant for the Pittsburgh Police. He treats victims of violent crime, people
Okay.
who maybe have survived a carjacking or a home invasion, or they worked as a teller in the bank when it was robbed. And they're traumatized by that experience. They have PTSD or some sort of psychological trauma state.
Hmm.
And he's brought in to treat them from the Victims Association at Pittsburgh Police. But because these are mysteries, he ends up, like a lot of amateurs do in mystery novels,
Hmm.
getting really involved
Right.
in stories. That one of the hardest parts is after a number of books, figuring out interesting ways and believable ways he could be involved in this.
Right. Right. I like the name of this one because I myself have had panic attacks in the past. So it's just a really good name of a book. So can you tell us a little bit about this one? It came out in September, this last September. So
Yeah,
tell us
Panic
a little bit
Attack
about.
is one of my favorites. A
Okay.
number of my readers think it's the best book, and it's really simple. It's about a sniper who seems to be shooting people from high elevations at random. And what's interesting about the book is two-thirds of the way through it, we catch the sniper.
Hmm.
And then the real mystery begins because everything that we've assumed, including the randomness of the victims, all turns out to not be true.
Wow.
And
Awesome.
so I get to do a lot of, as Publishers Weekly said, very smart detective work. Um, and but no, it's a really interesting book, and then it goes into a really interesting direction about a social issue that we're all struggling with.
Hmm.
That's behind the curtain of why these crimes are taking place.
Right.
And again, there's a reason. For example, one of the victims of the sniper attack, he's shot on his front lawn, and his wife is holding his hand, and she's frozen. She's catatonic from shock. And so it's plausible that the police would then ask Daniel Rinaldi to come and help them work with
Hmm.
this woman.
Hmm.
And so he gets involved in these sniper attacks, primarily dealing with victims. One of his patients, who he sees throughout the book, and we see that whole arc of their relationship, was someone who had been targeted and survived.
Right.
And so he's still traumatized, but he's walking and talking. So it gives me that plausible way that a psychologist who's a consultant for the police can legitimately get involved in the case.
Right. And as a trauma expert, obviously, any of these things happen in your book are going to cause trauma. And you being a psychotherapist, you understand trauma and the
Well,
signs of it and what happens.
moreover, I was very lucky. I spent 5 years after my license and everything. I was in a supervision group run by Robert Stollerow, who is the country's leading trauma expert.
Wow.
And so I learned a lot about the treatment of trauma.
Hmm.
And also my lead character has been traumatized. Before
Right.
the first book starts, years before, he and his wife had been mugged coming out of a restaurant in Pittsburgh. His wife got shot and was killed there, and my hero got shot and survived. And so he has survivor guilt.
Right.
And that's part of the reason he has a mission to help victims of violent crime.
Mm-hmm.
The way he puts it is, I don't understand my unearned luck, but I've been trying to earn it ever since.
Wow. That's interesting. So another thing that you're doing, well, I think you might be done, but the Hulu TV series, The Patient, you you were a consulting producer
Yes.
on The Patient. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was a wonderful experience. About a year and a half ago, Joe Weisberg and Joel Fields, the people who did The Americans, one of my favorite television series, called me out of the blue and said, we're doing a story about a patient who kidnaps his therapist, and the patient's a serial killer, and he wants the therapist to cure him of it. And you're a writer and you're a therapist, and we'd like you to consult.
Wow.
And so it was a wonderful experience. The way it would work is they would send me outlines of episodes, and then they'd send me the scripts, and then I'd help shape the dialogue, help say, this is what a therapist would say, this thing you have him doing here, he wouldn't do.
Right.
And after about 5 or 6 scripts, our working relationship became very, very connected.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt a big participant in shaping that show. One of my little points of pride is they didn't know the name. They didn't know what the media would call this serial killer. And one of the things the serial killer does is he takes the victim's watches and wallets and stuff. So it'd be hard for the cops to identify the victim for a couple days. And I said, yeah, they'd be John Does in the morgue. I said, why don't you call him the John Doe killer, which is what they ended up calling.
Oh, wow.
So I got to have a little creative contribution. I got to name the serial killer, which
That's
is
awesome.
kind of a dubious quality, but here I am. And I thought I was just going to be a technical consultant, but I was really honored when they came back to me at the end and said, given your contribution, we want to make you consulting producer.
Wow.
And I was thrilled.
That's awesome. Were you ever on set or anything, or was it all remote?
It's all shot in New York.
Okay.
And I thought it's so funny because they talked to me so much that when they talked to Steve Carell, they kind of told him about me.
Oh, wow.
And if you watch my patients who watched the show were really upset because Carell seems like me. He's got the salt and pepper beard. He talks the way I talk because I helped shape some of that dialogue.
Right.
And I don't want to give anything away, but things don't go so well for this therapist. And a number of my patients were very upset with what happened.
Uh-huh.
But it was a wonderful experience. These guys are such great writers.
That's awesome.
If your viewers have ever seen The Americans, it's one of the greatest series that's ever been on television. Quite wonderful.
That's great. What an opportunity to, be a part of something like that and then have such a, I don't want to say a footprint. I don't know what the right word, but just such a impact. That's the word.
Yeah, I was shocked. I didn't think it would be quite like that. Where we were by episodes 5 or 6 or 7, we were talking about what order scenes should be in and stuff like that, which, started to move outside of my mandate. But I was thrilled. They were great.
And I was going to say, it kind of comes back all around when you did all the TV shows and everything a long time ago. I mean, you had that experience, not just writing, but you understood, a lot of that too. So it seems like everything almost came full circle for you.
Well, that's what it felt like to me. That's what my agent said. He said, this is really amazing. This is coming full circle.
Yeah.
And they told me that the reason they reached out to me is, people in Hollywood know me as a therapist, but A lot of people also know me as a former Hollywood writer, so they felt they would get 2 for 1.
Well, sounds like they definitely got their money's worth.
Well,
So,
I think they did.
so last question I have because we're just about out of time. Um, this has just been wonderful. I just love listening to your process and all the things that you've done. So, what advice would you give to brand new writers, and then what advice would you give to seasoned writers when it comes to writing?
Well, the funny thing is, all the successful writers in my practice, and I'm very, you know, lucky because I have some really successful Emmy winners, Oscar winners, National Book Award winners, writers. And I always tell the ones who are breaking in or who are want to be writers who are struggling, I always tell them, all my successful writer patients used to be struggling writers, and they all still struggle. It's very hard for struggling new writers to believe that someone who's had a career as a novelist or a screenwriter or a TV writer for 20 years still gets blocked,
Hmm.
still worries about the second act issues that they have, still wonders if anyone's going to care about what they're working on. The very same issues you have as a struggling writer, you have as a professional, successful writer. The only difference is you're usually not worried about money so much, but everything else that accompanies the creative process, doubt, insecurity, a certain amount of hubris. There's a wonderful TV writer, Chris Brancato, who said, writers are egomaniacs with low self esteem. And that's a great phrase. And so the advice I give to anyone who wants to write is that you are enough right now to be the writer you want to be. You don't have to take more classes. You didn't have to have a parent who ran a studio. You didn't have to go to one of those hoity-toity Ohio writing programs. Your voice is uniquely yours. The key is what the golfer Ben Hogan said when someone said, "Gee, you're really lucky. You're so successful." And he said, "Yeah. And the harder I work, the luckier I get."
That's awesome.
And in my experience, writers create their careers by writing, not by thinking about it or taking 116 classes or reading self help books. If you were sitting by a swimming pool and you watch someone do the breaststroke, you can't say you know how to do the breaststroke based on what you observed. Somebody has to put you in a pool, and then we'll see if you know how to do the breaststroke. I think the same thing about writing. Writers teach themselves to write. Now, of course, with this, you should be reading constantly.
Right.
I mean, reading is the key, I think, to helping oil the machine for you.
Right. And reading good stuff and stuff that's not so good, because then you can kind of spot the differences.
Absolutely. And I always think you can learn from bad stuff. I've seen B movies that have one or two scenes in them that I think that's a great scene. You know what I mean? So you can learn from the A pictures, you could learn from B, C movies. You can learn from paperback books from the 50s. I mean, look how many writers like Philip K. Dick or Jim Thompson were turning out these wonderful novels for almost no money.
Right.
It were sold as cheap paperbacks in the 40s and 50s. And you read them now and you go, these guys were great. And so I really think you can learn from anything you read.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And it's simple too. It's not like to be a good writer, you have to, like you said, take 110 classes and have this and that. It's basically you just sit down, start writing, and
Yeah,
don't compare yourself to anybody else.
yeah. I mean, that job's taken. See,
Yeah.
when my patient said to me, "Gee, I'm no Billy Wilder," I thought to myself, but Billy Wilder had that job.
Yeah.
That job's been taken. This
I
is
love that.
your
I
job.
just love that. I really do. It's just, and I hope everybody watching takes that to heart, knowing that you don't have to be Billy Wilder or somebody else. You can just be you.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dennis, so much. This has been wonderful. I hope everyone's gotten something good out of it. And below the in the description, I'll have a way to connect with Dennis on his website. We'll have a link to his books. And and if you want to make comments, I'll make sure that Dennis sees them and responds to them too. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me, Joan. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you again for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. And we'll see you next time.